Welcome back to Financial Issues, folks. It's good to be here with you this morning. As you all know, if you're followers of our program, you probably know this. And for those of you who maybe are joining us for the first time, you'll find out really quickly. Here at Financial Issues, we're all about holding companies' feet to the fire when it comes to biblically responsible investing, of course. We want companies to stay neutral. We want them to treat their shareholders well. We don't want them involved in any kind of nonsense, political agendas that is going to be harmful to the shareholders as well as the customers also. We just want businesses to be in the business of being a good business. To use the word business probably too frequently there. Now, thankfully, we're not the only ones out there who are trying to do this. We also have organizations like the National Center for Public Policy and specifically the Free Enterprise Project. I've got a very special guest on the program with me today. I've got Stefan Padfield. Stefan is the executive director of the Free Enterprise Project at the National Center for Public Policy. He and his team work tirelessly to keep American corporate life free from woke nonsense. And we say yes and amen to that. Stefan, welcome to the show. Thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. That's a beautiful introduction. I greatly appreciate it.
Absolutely, sir. You know, we've had you on once before. It was back several months ago. But please remind our listeners just once again about the work that you do with the Free Enterprise Project. What's your organization engaged in specifically on a daily basis? And why do you do what you do?
Sure. So the Free Enterprise Project is one of the projects under the umbrella of the National Center for Public Policy Research. So I certainly encourage your listeners to go to our website, nationalcenter.org, and see all the different types of things that we're doing there. But at the Free Enterprise Project specifically, we basically work as a shareholder activist. So we own shares in a number of companies, name brand companies that your listeners would recognize, and we engage with them in a variety of ways, probably most prominently with our shareholder proposals. So we file these proposals. There's an entire rules-based system for who gets to file and when and how you get on the proxy. But ultimately, when we are able to get on the proxy and make it through the SEC review process, we then show up at the meetings, we make our pitch, and it's our way of essentially, as you say, trying to get corporations back to neutral. You know, I heard somebody recently say something that I really like, which is for those of us on the right, we just want corporations to get back to neutral. We win if they get back to neutral. Whereas the left has to have these corporations embrace or be forced to embrace their totalitarian views. So we actually have an advantage there because all we're asking for is neutrality. And so we do our work with these shareholder proposals. We're also engaged in litigation. Some of your listeners may have seen that recently we filed a lawsuit against United, questioning whether or not there are some problems there related to anti-Israel bias. And as soon as we filed that suit, they walked back some of their flight restrictions. So we do some work in that space. And then certainly just generally think tank sort of things like writing op-eds, writing papers. But engagement is the overarching theme. So when we file a proposal, we talk to the corporation, we try to get them to move the needle back to neutral, and then we'll withdraw our proposal if they do that. We've had some good success with that this season, but that's essentially the kind of work that we're doing.
Well, you know, I'll tell you what, brother, it's really an honor to be able to come alongside you guys. And what you guys do specifically, we here at Financial Issues really focus more on, finding companies that are not engaged in all the nonsense and investing in those companies. You guys are doing that impact where you're going in there and trying to change those companies. And that's amazing. And we want to be able to lift you guys up and celebrate that work. That is awesome. Once again, folks, nationalcenter.org is the place to go. So, Stefan, last week you issued a press release on the National Center's website titled Walmart, Netflix, PayPal, and Alphabet Held Accountable. I like what I'm hearing there right away. This concerns an annual shareholder meeting with each of these four companies. Would you share with our listeners what transpired in the last few days? Bring us up to speed on what's been going on with this.
Sure. So this is definitely the busy part of our season. We had 4 meetings last week. We've got 5 this week. So if we start with Walmart, they deserve a lot of credit, because they have walked back a lot of their divisive and what I think is fairly described as neo-racist and neo-Marxist DEI agenda. But we still had some questions, right? We certainly want to commend them. We want to encourage them to continue to go back to neutral. But 2 of our questions were, first and foremost, why did it take so long, right? Why did it take basically the DEI agenda being exposed to the public before you were willing to walk it back. And I think of particular concern there is, I'm sure you even, I think, mentioned Robbie Starbuck. Robbie Starbuck, I'm sure is, a lot of your listeners are fans of his work. I am
Absolutely.
a fan of his work.
We certainly are.
Easy to say, God bless Robbie Starbuck,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
So when he engages with companies, one of the things that he's reported back, and I believe him about this, is that he'll bring the receipts, right? I mean, he is actually simply exposing what is actually going on in the name of DEI. Nobody that I know has accused him of lying, right? Which I think is something really critical to keep pointing out. That is, it is actually the substance of these programs themselves that gets people to back away, right? Once you show them, because the words, I mean, the left deserves so much credit: diversity, equity, inclusion. Who could be against that,
Yeah.
right? But it's when you lift up the hood and you look up what's going on that you see the problems. So basically, he reported back that a lot of times he would show this to the executives and they would be shocked as to what's going on in the name of DEI. Now, there's a number of responses we could have to that. I think it's problematic from fiduciary duty standpoint, but certainly it's a place where shareholders should be asking questions, right? Do you have the appropriate information flow? Is there a problem of activists, in the bowels of your institutional bureaucracy that are pushing through this stuff behind the back of the upper level executives? So that was one of the questions. And then the other thing is, as excited as we are, and I think everyone, and I'm sure all your listeners are, about the vibe shift that we've seen and the actual tangible walking back from DEI and ESG by a lot of these companies, we do have to be very cautious about this being cosmetic, right? So they changed the language, they removed some pages from the web page. I mean, one of the things that I've seen that's been incredibly frustrating is literally within the same day, you'll hear a pronouncement from a corporation saying, we're essentially backing away from DEI. And then they'll turn to their leftist stakeholders and say, we're definitely not changing anything about DEI, right? I mean, it's completely
Right.
unsustainable to use the sustainability lingo. So we went back and we looked at their reports and their pages, and there's still a lot of things to be concerned about. One of the things we pointed out at the meeting was, they have their, I think they call it belonging now, right? So they changed the rhetoric, belonging page, and it basically references people of color 14 times and never references merit once. Okay. And then it's got these huge graphs about, demographic proportionality, sex, race. And so you can walk away from that and think to yourself, what exactly has changed? Because this looks exactly like the problematic focus on divisive DEI that we're concerned about. So that's a couple of things that were going on there at Walmart. And just, I know I spent a lot of time on that. I can get a little bit, fired up with these issues. But let me just real quick walk through the other ones.
Yeah,
so
please.
Then we went to PayPal. There we had a question about charitable contributions, right? And two issues predominantly. One is the extent to which they rely on the Southern Poverty Law Center to determine whether or not something constitutes hate or intolerance. If your listeners aren't familiar with the Southern Poverty Law Center, they brand themselves as this sort of nonpartisan fact checker, if you will, but they are completely biased and essentially try to weaponize those terms, those very vague terms, hate, intolerance, solely against right-leaning and conservative groups, right? So one of our concerns was, yes, PayPal, you don't have a policy that says we discriminate against conservative religious groups, but you have this hate speech policy and you rely on the Southern Poverty Law Center, SPLC, and we want to know and raise some issues there, raise some concerns, and know whether or not you are using that as cover to engage in anti-conservative bias, right? And then the other was the Human Rights Campaign. I'm sure your listeners are familiar with that organization. They have a corporate equality index. They essentially push radical transgenderism. And so we asked PayPal about that. Why are you involved in with this organization? And so I think one thing I want to point out when it comes to corporate involvement with HRC, we've engaged with a number of companies. You mentioned Alphabet. We specifically are asking them to stop participating in the HRC's equality index. And here's the point that I keep making is, so this organization is very clearly pushing a radical transgender agenda. And so when these corporations support the Corporate Equality Index by responding to the survey, or they even become partners, platinum partners, and so forth, have they actually come out in their board meeting and said, yes, we believe that a child can be born in the wrong body. We believe that a minor, should have, sex mutilation surgery behind the back of their parents. We believe boys and men should participate in women's sports. Are you actually answering those questions? Because that's what that organization is pushing. And if you're supporting that organization, then you should at least have decided that as part of your fiduciary duty. And then lastly, in terms of neutrality, one of the things that we'll do is we'll say, look, we don't want you doing anything politicized at all. But if you're going to lean into the left-leaning agenda, then you got to have some balance, right? That's the other way to get to neutrality. So why are you falling over backwards to support the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index and more broadly their agenda? And you're basically stiff-arming Alliance Defending Freedom, which has its own bias viewpoint diversity survey, right? So at the very least, how about doing both? Right. And then lastly, at Netflix, we have an affirmative action proposal, right? Basically pointing out in our proposal places where Netflix is essentially practicing affirmative action, right? And the sorts of things we see in this space is, a company will say, oh, we're donating, $100 million and we're only going to use that money to support, Black female businesses, which is essentially putting up a sign that says, no white males apply kind of thing.
That's right.
It's just straight up racial discrimination. And the fact that companies are still doing that is shocking, right? But that's the sort of thing that we fight against. And that's what we're out there every day and every week doing at these meetings.
Stefan, that is awesome. And tell our listeners really quickly here, because we want to be able to keep up to date with what's going on with these proposals. How can we follow? Is it all just at thenationalcenter.org?
Yeah, easiest thing to do is to go to the nationalcenter.org, and we've got a portal there, very obvious, that you can sign up for weekly email alerts.
Okay.
And you can limit it to only one of our projects, but I would say get all of them, because we have Project 21 is a Black Ambassador Conservative Voices Network. We've got Able Americans dealing with disability issues. And so just sign up for the newsletter. It's not very intrusive. Once a week, you get updated.
Awesome. Stefan Padfield, Executive Director of the Free Enterprise Project. We appreciate you so much, brother. Thank you for joining us today on the show and for the work that you guys do in the corporate space.